Um, last week, you were going to do a bit more work on your drawing.
Yeah.
You want to show that to me?
Sure.
Okay. Can you lift it up a little higher? How do you feel about it? It looks a lot better.
Yeah, it does look a lot better. Yes, it does. Yeah.
Right. Do you feel that the comments I made last week were helpful?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. No two ways about it. You are my guru.
Thank you. I have to tell that to my wife.
Ah. Well, if you're going to tell it to your wife, I'll come up with some other lovely word.
Right. Okay, then the other thing you were going to do was your color chart.
Oh, that's what did you get
Is this the thing you've been having a hard time with?
Well, yes, it's just absolutely, this is as far as I got. And so I started those numbers incorrectly. And I'm just going to have to do it over again. And then I was using the knife, the palette knife. And of course, it's all over the place. So, you know, what I plan on when I redo it is I will use a brush.
Yes, I would recommend the brush. It's a little bit of a stretch to try to do this with a palette knife.
Oh, how I learned that, yes.
Okay.
And then there are several colors. Oh, so could you tell me again why the first two yellows are only one?
Well, because coming out of the tube, as you squeeze them out of the tube, they actually come out at a 9, a value of 9.
Oh, okay.
So that's why they sit there. You don't have to do anything to them in order for them to be at a 9 value. Whereas with the third one here, Cad Yellow Pale, it comes out at about an 8.5, and then you've got to work it over. You got to put a little bit of white in it to get it over to this this value.
Okay.
Here.
All right.
And then
so do those numbers represent what it comes out of the tube as?
Right. The very last, as you can see.
Yes.
All right. These are the tube colors right here.
Okay.
All right. And then what we've done, of course, these are the darkest ones, and they come out at about a 2. Nothing in color comes out at the same value as black, at a 1 value. So the darkest we're going to get is 2. And then you can see as we tinted it up, it got lighter and lighter and lighter and began to correspond with these values up here. So theoretically, each of these columns here should be pretty much the same value. Now,
yes.
Human beings, you know, it shifts around a little bit, but
yes,
that's what we're aiming for. And it's important to recognize that this is just an exercise to familiarize you with the palette and also with the strength of these colors in terms of how much white you need to add in order to get, say, a Winsor Violet to a value of 9.
Okay.
Because we do a lot of this when we do our color studies. We're trying to get paint or a color into a shape at a value that we're seeing in that shape.
Okay.
So we have to do that in this exercise by adding white to it.
All right.
All right. So, and while we're talking about this, what I'm going to do here is a demo. It's almost impossible. Well, I can't say that it's almost impossible. It's very difficult to do a color study without having watched somebody do it, because
right.
there's a lot, there's a lot of new material there for most people. And when I do the color study and I talk about my first notes, each one of those first notes is going to correspond to one of these blocks of color here. Okay. So that's, so I can almost probably point them out to you as we do it.
So the first note is, where is that, in the deep shadow, or?
All right, we'll talk about that. I'll talk my way through the color study so that you can get a sense of it. Now, by way of introduction, this is, I'm going to put a little bit of strength on that. This is my armature, I call it. This is kind of the outline of this picture of a setup that you have where you are. Okay. So I'm actually going to work off this picture for this color study. And I think that's one of the limitations we have in doing this on a Zoom arrangement, is that you and I can't actually be looking at the same physical still life. So you have taken a picture of yours.
Yes.
And I'm going to work off the picture, but when you do yours, you're actually going to work off the still life that's in front of you. Mm-hmm. And I'm assuming that, your light and everything will be close enough to this so that this is an honest representation of what you're
mm-hmm. Yes.
Looking at. I also wanted to, to reference kind of the process we're going to follow, which is.
Oh, could I just interrupt a sec? So I mentioned that I didn't have the correct colors for the board, and that surprised me because your selection, it was so broad. Do you have other colors? Do I need to buy them exactly? Or I told you what I do have, but.
Well, I think you should work with what you've got. Now, I think in your email, you mentioned Prussian green instead of Viridian.
Yes.
Right? Work with your Prussian. If you've got the same color or a very close color with a different name, go ahead and substitute that. I'll be making a reference to colors based upon the list that I gave you.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Great. So
with that, the process we're going to follow is taken from the Henschel color study. And this is our primary source document. And this is a PDF. I think I sent you.
Yes, you did.
A link so that you could download it.
Yes.
And what the steps I'm going to follow are actually, in this little manual here.
Okay.
And I've distilled them into kind of 10 steps for the completed color study. And it'll probably take us the next 4 sessions to get through this color study. So it's something we want to take our time with. And, and really, Marie, the thing I wanted to emphasize with this is that a color study is just that. It's a study. It may end up as a beautiful painting, and some people, when they finish a color study, will frame it and sign it and enjoy it. But for the purposes of learning, it's an exercise. It's a study. Yes. And I want to encourage you to experiment as you do this, to allow yourself to fool around a little bit, to try this, to try that, to ask yourself a question about, what would this look like? What would that look like? So you really don't make any mistakes per se. I mean, there are a couple of things you can do that really make it hard, and I'll point those out to you. But for the most part, it is a process of refinement based on a set of principles. So
when I didn't get your email right away with your PDF this morning. And so I assumed that I was supposed to be doing some of that by myself. So I quickly did a light sketch of the objects.
okay.
And then I added a bit of color here and there without having a clue what I was doing. When it comes to the color and the color mixing, it scares the living daylights out of me. And I've got no idea how, such as the bottle. I put I put one color on there, but then I was trying to think like you do when you say, oh, I think I can, I put a very pale green in the middle. And then you would say, oh, I think I see a little blah, blah. Mm-hmm. Well, all I could see is like a grayish color. How do I get that? And I'm only supposed to use it once, correct? But right. I see a lot of gray, in that image.
Well, let's walk through one. And I think as we do this, the only way to learn this is to do it, to be honest with you.
Yes, I know.
It's a real challenge if you try to launch into it without actually having seen somebody do it. So well, I'll do this, and then we can talk about it. And between now and next week, maybe you can make a start of it today. You can do your first notes, but and then we can do a little critique on that. So let me start out. I guess it's a good idea to, sort of follow this outline religiously. Well, I don't follow it religiously. It's really, let's just say these are a certain set of rules, some of which you really want to follow, and some of them give you a little bit of a leeway. So what we've done here is just like we did with our charcoal, we create a set of shapes. If we can think of this as a set of shapes. And remember, this is a shape up here. This background is a single shape. We've got a bottle here that's got 1, 2, 3, and then a cast shadow. So it's got 4 shapes. We've got a ball here that's got 1, 2, 3 shapes. We have a block here that has 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the cast shadow is 5 shapes. And then we have this red block, which has 1, 2, 3 shapes. And then we have the table, which has this shape here. It goes kind of around all of these. So that's 1 shape. This is a 2nd shape, and then that's a 3rd shape. And when we start our first notes, we want to note that we're only going to use...
I'm just getting my pad to write on.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. For my first notes, I want to use a different color for each shape. As Henchy would say, there's no such thing as 2 shapes of the same color in nature. And so we begin, out of respect for that, by doing color studies where our first notes, each first note represents a different color off of our palette. Now, this is the palette I'm using. It's got all of the colors in it that we've discussed. It's got our 5 yellows, orange, cad red light, red. This is permanent rose, alizarin crimson. This is, oh gosh, magenta. And then we have dioxine purple or Windsor purple, French ultramarine, cobalt. This is cerulean. These are 2 other colors I was playing with last night. They're not on our palette of colors. This is my Viridian, or in your case, I guess it's going to be Prussian. This is a permanent green light. And I actually put a little bit of sap green in here. And these are our three neutrals. I was working on a different painting list. I'm sorry, I guess I lost that. This is the sap green here. But anyway, okay. That's what I'm working with. I have a I call this a mixing board. I kind of hold it in my left hand and I'll do my mixing this way. So I've got my palette down over here to my right, and I will be grabbing paint off that palette and putting it on here to mix or to tint up. And we'll be working on this board here. So as I'm looking at our setup here, the first question is, where does my eye go first? Over here. What is my eye drawn to? And it's usually going to be the lightest or the darkest shape in the setup. So as I'm looking at it, and really the dark is kind of pulls my eye this way, more so I think than the light. So I'm actually going to start with the darkest dark here, and which is going to be this ball. So it's the shadow plane of that ball. So my question is, I'm going to take my color from the cool side of the palette, which are my greens and my blues. And as we look at this palette, we'll bring it up here again. See that? Yeah. My shadow planes are going to come from this side, right in here. This magenta and so can alizarin crimson can be a shadow or a light plane depending upon how dark or light that is. They can actually play both roles. So this ball is a very, very dark shadow plane. So what I'm going to do is I'm probably going to use either my purple or my ultramarine blue, because the value of those two colors coming out of the tube matches the value that I'm seeing here. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do.
All right. So I'm going to pull, I think what I'm going to do is I'll just pull some of that purple, and I'm going to put it on my, my little palette here. I like to put just a touch of white into these colors because it gives them a sense of, it kind of brings out the color of that. And so all I'm going to do, and you can see how dark that is I'm just going to put a note in here, just in the center of that shape. And I'm going to claim that shape for that color. That's all I'm going to do. I'm just identifying the darkest shape in this setup, and I have grabbed a color that comes closest, a color from like the cool side of my palette that comes closest to matching that value as it comes out of the tube. All right, so we've done that. So I'm finished with that note. I'm going to clean my palette knife, and then I'm going to move to an adjacent shape. We want to move to adjacent shapes because that way we're able to make a better judgment about how different those shapes are from each other. In other words, I can compare these shapes and get a sense of the value of this shape by looking at the value of this one. So we've got us a light plane here. Now, when you look on the color wheel, as the color wheel warms up, moving away from the cold blues, it begins to move in towards the reds. And pretty much one of the principles that we follow is how do you express the warmth of the light plane of a blue ball? How do you best express the warmth of that when you're trying to be faithful to the fact that this is a plane that's got light on it, even though it's a cool local color?
Mm-hmm.
Well, one of the things we do is we use pink. And, my permanent rose is my pink that I'm going to use. So I'm taking some permanent rose, and I put it on my palette here, and I'm going to look at that light plane over there. It's definitely lighter than the shadow plane, but it's still a very dark plane, even though it's a light plane and it's got warmth in it. So I'm going to take some of this permanent rose. I put a little bit of white in it, kind of give it a little bit of tint. And I'm going to put it in there. And one of the things I want to make sure is that what I'm putting in here is in fact lighter in value than what I put over here. And one of the ways that I do that is I squint. By squinting, it actually helps me distinguish the relative values of these two against each other. Mm-hmm. So I've got something here that's lighter. And it's also good to keep in mind that this is a process of refinement and refinement and refinement. And the values and the colors and the intensities that I put in these first notes are simply a first note. We're going to modify all of those over time as we refine the study. So we don't have to be afraid of it. You know, we don't have to get it perfect. We're just making our best shot. So we've got a light plane and a shadow plane, and we've got this cast shadow here. So as I'm looking at my three cast shadows, one question I ask it myself is, which is the darkest of the three? The second question I ask myself is, what is the relative value of that? How light or dark is that cast shadow compared to some of the things, some of the shapes around it? And the main comparison is going to be the shadow plane of the ball there. Well, the cast shadow is really significantly lighter than that shadow plane of that ball. So I'm looking for something that's coming from the cool side of the palette, but it's coming out of the tube a little bit lighter.
Could you go back? What is the difference between shadow plane and cast shadow?
All right, this is the shadow plane of the ball. A shadow plane is a surface that is not catching any light. So okay. It's the dark side of it. A cast shadow is different from a shadow plane in that it is it's a part of the setup that is where the light is being blocked and creates this very clearly delineated shadow against something else, like the surface of the table. So it's a cast shadow. It's a shadow that's being cast by this object.
But it is picking up a bit of light in a sense.
It is. It's got light in there. In fact, all of these shapes have some light in them. Mm-hmm. Even the shadow plane's got reflected light in it.
Right.
All right. So right now I'm just asking myself the question, how light or dark is this compared to, say, this color that I chose for that shadow plane of the ball? And as I'm looking at this over here, it's probably of the three shadows, the three cast shadows that I can see there, the bottle, the block, and the ball, the cast shadow off the ball is lighter. And I'm thinking I'm going to use one of my, a green for that shadow. A green is a cool color. It comes out of the tube at a value that would respect a cast shadow, but I can use my white to tint that green up to try to get it to the value that I'm seeing right here. And so, you know, I'm gonna go out and I'm gonna put something in there like that. Do a little bit of, I think it needs to be a little bit darker. So maybe I'll darken that a little bit. Something along those lines. Yeah, that's about right. For first note, that'll do fine. Now note that I chose my color because this is a shadow, a cast shadow. So I'm coming from the cool side of the palette. But it also is a shadow that's not as dark as this shadow. So I can use a color that's coming out of the tube at a value that's lighter than this one. And I have a lot of choices actually. And because I can tint these first notes up, I can choose, I have several things I can choose from. So I chose my Viridian, which is, put that down. So I chose my Viridian, which was right here. I could have chose cerulean. I mean, that would probably work too, and tint it up, or even the cobalt. But I chose the green.
So how does a student, early time student, remember which one they've used where?
Well, that's a good question. And sometimes we forget, especially with the yellows, because they can look so much alike. You just do the best you can.
Mm-hmm.
You know, try to follow the rule.
Henchy's not going to whack our knuckles.
No, he doesn't hear us talking.
All right.
All right, so I'm going to move now to the bottle, now that we've got our first notes established here. And of course, this is a very light plane here. And it is the lightest shape in the entire setup. It's going to be this light plane of this white bottle. It's even lighter than the very light cloth, pinkish cloth that is the table. So I'm going to use probably my lightest warm color, which is going to be my lemon yellow. This comes out of the tube at a, I think we said it was a 9, right? So I'm going to grab some of this here. I want you to see that. I'm going to put it on my palette to play with it. And I'm going to add some white to that. Now, different people who teach this will tell you, well, you want to use a pure color and you don't want to add any white to it. But I always add a little bit of white to these colors because I find them easier to work with when I do that. So as you can see, I've created a very light color here. And I'm going to take that and I'm going to stick it in here like this. Okay, I'm just claiming this shape for that color. That's all I'm doing. So next to it is a halftone. Now I put the halftone in the bottle. I could have put it in the ball, but I didn't. And in fact, I think what I'm going to do for the sake of simplicity is I'm going to ignore this halftone on the bottle so that we're being consistent with these round objects in the way we're treating them. All right, we'll put that halftone in later. Let's just keep this simple. So I can, this whole light plane here, pretty much for the most part, the halftone is part of the light plane. So this is my light plane. Now I've got my shadow plane. And as I look at that shadow plane over there, I compare it to the shadow plane of the ball, and the shadow plane of the bottle is lighter in color. So I'm looking over here at my possible colors that I might use. And I'm going to use a blue, and I'm going to use a cerulean blue for that. cerulean blue comes out of the tube a little bit lighter, a little bit. It's a cool color, but it's got a little bit of warmth in it. And so if I use it just coming right out of the tube, I'll put a dash of white in there to give it a little personality. And we'll stick it in here. And one of the things I'm thinking about as I do this is I don't want this to be as dark as this, because it's lighter in value than this very, very dark shape here. So as I'm comparing this to this, I think I can say that this is a little bit lighter than that. So I'm just going to leave it the way I put it in there. I'm happy with that. Now let's look to this cast shadow that is being cast by that bottle. And I'm going to contradict myself. I think I said this was the lightest of the cast shadows. I'm thinking this one is, as I look at this again. And this happens to me all the time. As my second and third glance at something, I may see it a little bit differently. So I'm actually going to lighten this up when I choose my color for it. So as I'm looking over at the colors I've got left here, I've got I got some cobalt blue, and I've got some French ultramarine. I haven't used either one of those colors. So I'm going to pull this French ultramarine color right there. I'm going to tint it up with some white. And what I want to do is put a color in there that is not as intense or as light in value as this. So as I'm squinting at it, now it's got to be a little bit lighter than that. So let's see if, and I'm going back and forth and back and forth. I think I've got this to a point where I want it now. This is lighter than this. Now we're going to move over to our this yellow block here. And the yellow block really has 4 planes, because it's kind of cut 3 ways here. You got 3 surfaces. But I think what I'm going to do is combine these 2 into one for the sake of simplicity at this point in time. And then I can break them apart later. So as I look at this, the lightest shape is this one here, from what I'm seeing over there. So what I'm going to do is look at my yellows. And of course, this is darker than this. So I'm going to pull one of my darker yellows. Maybe I pull my cad yellow and I put it on here. And maybe, again, I might put a touch of the white in there just to give it some personality. And then we'll put it in here. I think I might tint that up just a touch. Just a touch. Yeah. So we'll put it there. Now I'm going to look at what I see as the next darkest. Okay, this is the lightest. This would be the next darkest, moving towards the dark. And I'm going to use another one of my yellows, but I think what I'm going to do here is use
because now you've used 2 yellows.
Right. So I've got to pick another yellow. I'm going to use my deep there. So I've got my yellow deep. I'm going to add a touch of white to it. And note, when I put this on there, it should look a little bit darker than that yellow here. Of course, it's not at that point. So I'm gonna a little more tube color there. All right,
so you do not combine colors.
No,
you do not.
You
don't
only
mix
use one
them.
color, right?
You don't.
You use one color.
Okay.
So this one's a little bit darker than that. And for now, I can accept that. Now this is a darker plane. This is actually a shadow plane here. And this is sort of almost a halftone. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to combine these together, and I'm going to use my yellow ochre, which is a darker color than the pure yellows. I'm going to tint it. A little bit. And let's see what, and I can bring it in here like this. And I said I was going to. All right, so I've got my 3 different colors. Now I'm going to skip the cast shadow here because you can barely see it. Let's go to this red block. So I've got a very light plane here, the top of that red block. And then I've got a shadow plane here. And then I've got a cast shadow here. So how can I represent the warmth of this surface here at a value that's consistent with what I'm seeing in this picture here? I'm going to actually use some orange. And so I chose the orange, putting it on my board here. I'll put a little bit of white in it, just enough to give it some personality. And we'll try it out up here. I think that's good enough for that first note. Now we're going to look at this shadow plane here. And it's obviously darker. And I think what I'm going to use for that shadow plane is one of my darker reds, one of the reds that can kind of be a shadow plane or a light plane, depending on how you tint it. So I'm actually going to pull some alizarin crimson, which is a dark red. And I'm going to put a little bit of white in it just to kind of give it some personality. And even that might be a little too dark. I might want to bring it up just a little bit more. Okay, I can live with that. Now we've got the cast shadow over here. And that cast shadow is that if this is the mid, this is the lightest, this actually I think is the darkest of these 3. So I think I used, what did I use here? This goes back to your question that you said about how do you remember what colors you use? I think I used ultramarine over here, or cobalt, one of them. But I'm going to assume that I used ultramarine, so I'm going to pull some cobalt, and I'm going to lighten it up, try to get me up to a tint that's fairly consistent with what I'm seeing there. And I look at how dark this is relative to these other colors. And I think I've achieved, roughly what I was trying to do with that. And of course, this is darker than that and not quite as dark as this. So I keep, comparing it back and forth to these other shapes, especially the ones that are close by, to kind of confirm for me that I put the right value in there. And when we look at this, okay, each one of these notes came out of one of these squares. So for instance, let's take the ball. So I used a purple over here. So I look at my Winsor Violet, and I probably came out right around here for that. Then we look at this light plane of the ball, and I used permanent rose for that. And I probably came out something in this vicinity for that. We look at the bottle for this very, very light color here. I think I used a lemon yellow, and I even tinted that up a little bit to brighten it. And then for the shadow plane, I used a cerulean, which is down here. And I probably pulled out something over in this area. You see how that works?
Uh-huh.
Why I think this is such a great exercise, because
Yes.
basically I'm just peeling out stuff I've already worked with. All right, so let's take a look then at, I'll wipe this off. Let's take a look at the table. The table is very, very light. And it's actually, it's darker than this. And I think it's actually a little bit darker than this even, but it's certainly lighter than this. So you begin to see how this gets a little bit complicated. So I'm going to come up with a color for this, and I'm going to use, I think I'm going to use for that my Cad Red Light, which I haven't used anywhere else yet. And I'm going to tint it up really, really high using my white. And I can go down here and put something right there. And it's a touch darker than this. Of course, it's darker than that. So I'm just putting it in a couple different places so I can make sure that it's got that kind of quality to it. This is actually darker than that. And so I probably need to darken this some at the top. I can already begin to see that. But we're not going to worry about that right now. So this is what I'm going to do the table with, which is a light plane. And now I have these other two separate pieces over here. And what I'm going to do, because I want to use different colors for that, is I'm going to dig into my red. And I'm going to tint it really high. I'm going to go up here with that. And I'm looking at here at this one.
Now, is that the same red?
No, this is a Cad Red Light. This is a Cad Red.
Okay.
All right. Now, I've already used my permanent rose. Have not used my magenta. So I've got a magenta that I can pull. And I'm going to really lighten that up. And we'll put the magenta in here. They look very similar, don't they?
Uh-huh, they do, from here.
Yeah. All right. Now the last shape I want to deal with now is going to be the background. And you can see here the background is dark. It's not as dark as this shadow plate here, but it certainly is darker than the surface of the table. So what am I going to do back there? Well, I've got, looking at, different colors that I have and haven't used. I've got my neutrals that I have not used. So I'm going to pull this Indian light, and I'm going to put it on my palette. I'll tint it a little bit.
What is the difference between Indian and, was it Prussian?
The Prussian, you mean, is green. I'm using light Indian red.
But isn't there another red that is a country or a nationality?
I'll have to think about that.
Let me have a look at mine.
I think Venetian red.
Yes.
Yeah, there is.
Are they close?
Yes.
So I can use that?
Yes, you can use that.
Okay.
All right, anyways, so I've got this neutral now, and I'm looking at, it's actually not as dark as this, so I made it too dark. So I'm gonna add a little more white to it. And sometimes you sort of don't know what you got until you stick it on the, let me do this.
And you never add the white onto the color on the canvas. You mix it on the board.
Not at this stage, no, not at this stage. So anyway, so what I can say is this is darker than this, and it's lighter than that. And that was what I wanted to achieve, something in between these two values. So you can see this is going to be my background. Now, yes, it's true. This background is brown. It's a brownie neutral background, but that's not necessarily why I chose this color. I actually chose this color because it's what was left on my palette. I can use a green back here. I could have used a red back there. It's the background, and it's really just serves as a frame for what we're doing here. So the main thing was to try to get something back there that picked up that value. And notice the way I'm applying the paint, Marie. This is a palette knife. When people think of a palette knife, they like to do this with it and push it. It's kind of like shaving, if you would assume that this was I guess, I better not compare it to a straight razor, but you actually come down, you scrape it like that. You keep it nice and thin. You let a little bit of the tooth of the canvas behind it kind of show through. You don't want to put big blobs of paint like that because it's very difficult to work with when you start adding colors in. You want to keep your paint thin. You want to draw it across the canvas using this upside down like that.
So have you got it totally on its side, or?
Well, it's sort of like this, just a little bit of a
okay,
like that.
All right.
You'll see. It's an angle at which it tends to work the best. You'll see that when you do your first notes. All right, so just a little bit of a review because these first notes can throw people. The idea here is that the light planes here, 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 and the table come from the warm side of the palette. And for each one of those light planes, you want to pull a color that's as close as possible to the value of what you're seeing in that shape. All right?
Okay.
So you want to pull something from the warm side of the palette that coming out of the tube comes close to the value of what you're seeing.
I just need to get my, I guess the battery's low. Excuse me.
Okay.
out, baby. Sorry. Okay, I'm back. I'm back.
All right. You're plugging yourself in, huh?
Yes. Thank you. This is so interesting.
All right, so just a quick review. You can only use a color once for your first notes. Your light planes are going to come off the warm side of your palette, and you try to match as best you can the value of that plane with the value of the paint as it comes out of the tube. And as you get towards the end, sometimes you run out of colors and you've got to really tint up some, another color in order to make it work. But if you have a choice, you want to pick a color that comes closest to the value that you've got in that shape when that color comes out of the tube. And really, it's the same thing for the shadow planes. The shadow planes and cast shadows all come from the cool side of the palette. And alizarin crimson and magenta are colors that can go either way. They can be a warmish cool, or they can be a coolish warm. And then when you put your color in to that shape, put it somewhere close to the middle of the shape. Leave lots of space around it. You're not trying to fill that shape out at this point. You're just basically claiming that shape for that color. And if you look at your Henchy color study, he has a picture of the study that they did, and it looks a lot like this after they put their first notes in there. You'll see that. Okay. Looking at our time, we've got about five or 10 more minutes. The next step with this is to go back in with the same colors and refine it as needed. In other words, I can either darken or lighten the colors that I've put in there. And I may make a decision to do that as I fill these colors out, because once these colors begin to sit next to each other, you begin to see them differently. So it's possible that a color or a value that I've chosen here as my first note, as I begin to fill color out around that value or that color, it may seem a little too dark or a little too light. It's just the way the eye perceives these things.
And you have any clues how the new student can remember what they used?
Well, no, you just have to do the best you can. I couldn't remember what I used either, so
okay.
But what I'll give you, I'll start on that process. Let me go back to the purple here. I remember what I used there, right?
Yes.
And I put a little bit of the white in there.
Can you send me a picture of what you've done today?
Yes, I will.
Thank you.
All right, so what I'm going to do here is try to match the value of that color that I put in there. And I'm going to fill this out. But notice I don't go all the way to the edge. I want to leave about 1/4 inch or so of white space between this color and the edge of the shape. See that?
Yes.
Right, and I'm just kind of roughing it out there. All right. Then I'm going to go to this light plane, and I used I used my pink, my permanent rose for that. So what I'm going to do is put that in there. And notice how I'm just kind of whacking at it a little bit. Scrapey, scrapey, mashy, mashy, kind of, pulling the paint over the tooth of the canvas because I want to keep it thin. But notice how I've left that white space there. And as I look at it, you know, I squint at it, I look at this, and I go back and forth. And it appears to me that this is a little bit lighter, maybe than this, as I look at the setup over there. So what I'm going to do, Marie, is I'm going to lighten that a little bit. By adding some white to it. And I promise you it won't be the last time I do that. So that, I'm a little happier with that. I'm not quite sure. We'll see how it plays out as we fill out some of the rest of those shapes. So I can move from here to the bottom. Well, I'm going to go to the cast shadow. And I used a Viridian green for that cast shadow. And of course, I've already got most of these colors on my palette because I've already been working with them, which also helps you remember which ones you use. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to fill that out. I keep looking at that, looking at this, and I'm kind of trying to keep my faithful to the value that I put in there. All right, that's as far as I'll take that shape. So let's take a look at the bottom. We've got about 5 minutes. I know what that is. That's a really, really light yellow that I use there. Grab myself another paper towel. That was my lemon yellow. So I've got some lemon yellow on here still. I'm going to go after this. I'm going to fill that out with my lemon yellow, but it's also an opportunity, if I feel like I need to either lighten or darken this. If I want to darken it, I'll just add some of the tube color. If I want to lighten it, I will add some white to do that. So the only other color I'm using in these first notes as I fill these shapes out is white. And then let's look at the shadow plane here. I used some cerulean for that. And I'm going to grab some cerulean here and put it there. Put a little bit of the white in there. And see where that goes. That's about right, I guess. Notice how that I'm leaving the edges untouched.
Yes.
All right, there's my bottle. And I've also got the cast shadow here. And this is where I use my French ultramarine, I believe. I did. Good old Frenchie. Too dark. And if you have to guess at lightening or darkening something when you put it in, because you're just sort of guessing at it until you can get it together, you want to err on the side of being too light. It's a lot easier to darken something that's too light than it is to lighten something that's too dark.
Okay.
All right. So what I'll do, and what I would like you to do this week, is you do your first notes, and then you go like I'm doing. So the next thing I would do would be to go here, pick up this color. Well, actually, it would be this one here first. I know what I did there. And put some white around it. I don't have any white that's not contaminated.
Oh, I came across a titanium white. What is that?
I actually don't know for sure. I've never used it. All right, so I filled this out. Now the top plane was darker. That was this yellow deep. It was a very deep color. So we'll take some on top. Then here, this is where I put my my ochre. So I'm going to put that ochre back in there. I might lighten it up just a touch. And now we have this block. So I'll do the same thing with that. I'll put my my orange in there. Tint it up some. Sometimes when you start mixing your new pile, it doesn't come out quite. And I'm just, you know, laying some strokes in here. What I might do, Marie, is I'm videotaping this. I might be able to upload it to YouTube and you can watch it a second time if you want.
Oh, great. Fun.
I'll have to remember to do that. And then we've got our alizarin crimson, I think is what we were using there.
Do you have to pay to upload to YouTube?
No, I have one of those free accounts. All right, and then the last thing, and then I got to go, is going to be this cast shadow, and I believe I used cobalt for that, which I still have here. All right. This is the point. Of course, I haven't filled out the table yet, but once I begin to fill these colors out, I can begin to make some really nice comparisons as to whether I want to lighten or darken any of these relative to the shapes that are around it. It's always a matter of comparing with your eye. Do I need to lighten or darken any of those shapes? And I've used a single color. So the next step would be for me to begin to fill all of this out with this very highly tinted cad red light and these other two colors over here, red and then magenta, tinted up very high. And then I would using the same paint here, I would go all the way around, you know, up here. And so you can begin to see that we've already begun to create kind of an interesting
yes.
study here, you know?
Yes.
And, you know, keep the paint thin. You want to, in a sense, you scrape the paint on. You just draw it down like this. Just keep filling it up. And so those are our first notes, and you can read about it under that lesson 1 of the Henchy color study. You can also read the PDF. It's got some interesting stuff in there. But everybody does this a little bit differently. I've made my own adaptations, but for the sake of instruction, I'm trying to remain faithful to that outline so I don't confuse anybody. Any other questions? So next week, now I'm using, I think this is 16 by 20. And I'll be using a little bit larger canvas board because I want it to be big so you can see it.
Yes.
You can use a 12 by 16, but if you can get a larger one, the next size up, I would go ahead and do that. Just gives you more space to work in. And I'll try to download this or upload this video so that you can click on it.
So when you upload it, you just send it to me, and then it'll go, when I click on it, it goes straight to YouTube.
Yeah, you'll just click on the link and it will take you to YouTube and start the video for you. You can.
Great, I appreciate that. Thank you. This has been fun. Thank you.
All right, dear. You have a good week, and when we come back together, you know, have one of these as best you can.
I will do my best.
The important thing will be the little question and answer we get into around it, so that you get it's going to raise lots of questions for you. Don't worry about that.
Yes, I'm quite sure.
All right.
Have a nice week.
Okay, Maria, you take care, hon.
You too. Bye-bye.